At 8:15 in the morning, 70,000 people were alive in Hiroshima. At 8:15 and 43 seconds, they were not. No warning, no sound they would have recognized as danger. One moment, a city of 300,000 people going about an ordinary Tuesday morning. School children walking to class, shopkeepers opening their stalls, soldiers reporting for duty, mothers cooking breakfast. A man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi walking to a train station, realizing he had forgotten something at the office, turning back. And then, a light. Not an explosion, not at first. A light so total and so white that it erased everything. Brighter than the sun, brighter than anything any human eye had ever registered. A light that moved faster than sound, faster than thought, faster than the instinct to close your eyes. In 43 seconds, the most destructive weapon ever used on a human city had detonated 580 meters above the ground and released the energy equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. What it left behind was not a battlefield. It was not rubble in the way that bombed cities look like rubble. It was something new, something the world had never produced before and has never produced again. Two cities, reduced not to ruins, but to ash, to shadow, to silence. This is the story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, why the bombs were built, why they were dropped, what happened to the people underneath them, and the question that historians, scientists, and governments have been arguing about for 80 years and have still not answered. Was it necessary? The bomb did not begin with a decision to destroy a city. It began with a fear. In 1939, Albert Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt warning him that Nazi Germany was likely pursuing research into nuclear fission, the process of splitting atoms to release enormous energy. If Hitler's scientists built an atomic weapon first, the consequences for the world were too catastrophic to contemplate. Roosevelt authorized a response. What became the Manhattan Project was the most expensive and most secret scientific undertaking in American history. $30 billion in today's money. 130,000 people working across dozens of sites, most of them with no idea what the project they were contributing to would ultimately produce. Physicists recruited from universities, engineers from industry, many of them were refugees from Europe, Jewish scientists who had fled Nazi persecution and who understood better than anyone what was at stake if Germany got there first. The scientific director was J. Robert Oppenheimer. Brilliant, complicated, a man who read Sanskrit poetry for relaxation, and who understood with perfect clarity both the extraordinary physics he was overseeing and the moral weight of what it would produce. He ran the primary research facility at Los Alamos, New Mexico, a secret city that did not officially exist, where the scientists and their families lived behind fences and under surveillance, and worked toward a weapon that would change everything. Germany surrendered in May 1945. The weapon they had feared Germany would build, Germany never came close to building. The Manhattan Project had been racing a ghost. But the bomb was almost ready, and the war in the Pacific was still very much alive. By the spring of 1945, American forces were island-hopping toward Japan, and every island was costing more than the last. The Battle of Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island of 8 square miles, killed nearly 7,000 Americans and 21,000 Japanese in 36 days. The Battle of Okinawa killed 12,000 Americans and over 100,000 Japanese, plus an estimated 100,000 Okinawan civilians caught between the two armies. The projection for Operation Downfall, the planned Allied invasion of the Japanese home islands, was catastrophic. American military planners estimated between 250,000 and 1 million American casualties. Japanese military and civilian casualties were projected in the millions. Japan had made clear through its actions on Iwo Jima and Okinawa that it would defend its home islands to the last person. A committee was formed to select atomic bomb targets. Their criteria were specific. The target city had to be large enough that the weapon's full destructive power could be measured. It had to have military or industrial significance. And, this detail is one that rarely makes it into textbooks, it had to be largely undamaged by conventional bombing so that the effect of the atomic weapon could be accurately assessed. They drew up a list. Hiroshima was on it. So was Nagasaki, Kokura, Niigata, and Kyoto. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, personally removed Kyoto from the list. He had honeymooned there and considered it too culturally significant to destroy. A city of 1 million people was spared because a senior official had pleasant personal memories of it. Another city, one with no such advocate, would take its place. On July 25, 1945, the order was issued. The 509th Composite Group was authorized to deliver the first atomic bomb as soon as weather permitted after August 3rd. The primary target was Hiroshima. Colonel Paul Tibbets named the plane after his mother, Enola Gay Tibbets. He had it painted on the nose himself, in block letters, the night before the mission. Whether Whether this was sentiment or superstition, or simply the act of a man trying to hold on to something human before doing something inhuman, he never fully explained. The bomb loaded into the Enola Gay's Bay was called Little Boy. It was 10 feet long, 28 inches in diameter, and weighed 4,400 kilograms. It contained 64 kilograms of enriched uranium-235. Its explosive yield was the equivalent of 15,000 tons of TNT. Tibbets and his crew of 11 took off from Tinian Island at 2:45 in the morning on August 6th. 6 hours of flying across the Pacific. The crew had been briefed on their target. They had not been told, in full, what the weapon they were carrying would do to the city they were flying toward. At 7:09, a weather reconnaissance plane reached Hiroshima and radioed back. Clear skies, visibility unlimited. The city was visible below, intact, ordinary, alive with a Tuesday morning in summer. The Enola Gay arrived over Hiroshima at 8:09. Tibbets handed control to his bombardier, Major Thomas Farabee. Farabee locked onto the aiming point, the Ioe Bridge, a distinctive T-shaped bridge in the center of the city. The bomb bay doors opened. The crew put on their protective goggles. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, Farabee released the bomb. Little Boy fell for 43 seconds. At 8:16, it detonated at 580 meters above the Shima Surgical Clinic. The temperature at the center of the explosion reached several million degrees Celsius. For reference, the surface of the sun is approximately 5,500 degrees. Within 1 kilometer of the detonation point, everything was destroyed instantly. The heat was so extreme and instantaneous that nothing in its path survived, leaving only shadows burned permanently into the stone and concrete behind them. Those shadows are still there today. They are the only monument those people received. Beyond the immediate destruction zone, the blast wave arrived, a wall of compressed air moving at roughly 1,000 kilometers per hour, capable of destroying reinforced concrete buildings, carrying glass and debris at lethal velocities, and causing unimaginable devastation across every street and structure in its path. Then the fires began. Dozens of separate fires ignited simultaneously across the city, eventually merging into a firestorm, a self-sustaining column of flame that creates its own wind, pulling in oxygen from the surrounding area, burning at temperatures that make survival within its radius impossible, regardless of shelter. 70,000 people died in the first minutes. By the end of 1945, the death toll from blast, burns, and radiation sickness had reached an estimated 140,000. Of Hiroshima's 45 hospitals, 42 were destroyed. 90% of the city's doctors and nurses were dead or seriously injured. The people who survived the explosion had almost no one to help them, and among the ruins, moving through a landscape that looked like the surface of another planet, were the hibakusha, the survivors, people who had been far enough from the center to live, but close enough to carry the bomb's effects for the rest of their lives. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was 29 years old and a naval engineer at Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He had been in Hiroshima for 3 months on a business trip designing oil tankers. August 6th was supposed to be his last day. He was heading to the train station to go home to Nagasaki, where his wife and infant son were waiting. He had forgotten his travel stamp at the office. He turned back to get it. That detour, that small, ordinary administrative inconvenience, is the reason he was still in the street, 1.6 kilometers from the detonation point, when Little Boy exploded above the city. He saw the Enola Gay. He saw something fall from it. 2 objects, descending slowly on parachutes. He was trying to understand what he was looking at when the sky turned white. The blast threw him to the ground, and he suffered severe blast injuries. When the darkness cleared enough for him to see, the city around him was unrecognizable. He crawled to an air raid shelter. He found 2 of his colleagues, miraculously alive. They spent the night in the shelter, and the following morning, with the city still burning around them, they walked to the train station and boarded a train. Yamaguchi arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th. He went to hospital, had his injuries treated, rested for a day, and then, because he was that kind of man, reported to work on August 9th to brief his supervisor on what had happened in Hiroshima. He was in the middle of describing the bomb to his supervisor when the room lit up with a light he recognized. Suddenly, the same white light filled the room. The second bomb, Fat Man, had just detonated over Nagasaki, 3 kilometers away. Tsutomu Yamaguchi is the only person in history officially recognized by the Japanese government as a survivor of both atomic bombings. He lived until 2010. He was 93 years old. It was Kokura, a city with a major arms manufacturing complex, considered a higher priority military target. The B-29 carrying Fat Man, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, reached Kokura on the morning of August 9th and made 3 bombing runs over the city. Each time, smoke and cloud cover obscured the target. After 45 minutes circling a heavily defended city while burning through fuel, Sweeney made the decision to move to the secondary target. Kokura was saved by clouds. Nagasaki was not. Fat Man detonated detonated at 11:02 a.m., 503 meters above the Utakami Valley in northern Nagasaki. Its yield was 21 kilotons, larger than Little Boy. But Nagasaki's hilly geography contained the blast in ways that Hiroshima's flat terrain had not, and the bomb detonated almost 2 kilometers from its intended aiming point. 40,000 people died instantly. By the end of 1945, the total death toll reached approximately 74,000. The Utakami Cathedral, the largest Catholic church in East Asia, was destroyed. The Nagasaki Medical College Hospital, constructed of reinforced concrete 600 meters from ground zero, recorded a 60% death rate among its patients and staff. 3 days after Hiroshima, in a different city, the world had ended a second time. Here is what most people were never told. Japan had been attempting to negotiate a conditional surrender through the Soviet Union for weeks before the bombs were dropped. The condition Japan sought was the preservation of the emperor, not a continuation of the war, but protection of the imperial institution central to Japanese culture and identity. American leadership knew about these overtures. They chose not to respond to them. The cities on the original target list were specifically chosen because they were largely intact, not because they were the most important military targets, but because an undamaged city would allow American scientists to accurately measure the bomb's effects. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were, in part, selected because their city had not yet been destroyed. The shadow people, the human shapes burned permanently into Hiroshima's stone steps and walls, are not metaphors. A person sitting on the steps of the Sumitomo Bank, approximately 250 meters from ground zero, left only their shadow scorched into the granite. That shadow was still visible in the 1970s. Some have been preserved in the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. The survivors, the hibakusha, faced discrimination in Japanese society for decades. They were denied life insurance. They struggled to find marriage partners. Women who had been in Hiroshima and Nagasaki hid their status to find husbands. Some hid it for life. The bomb did not stop affecting people in August 1945. It kept affecting them for generations. And the pilot who dropped the first bomb, Paul Tibbets, said until the end of his life in 2007 that he had no regrets. He believed the bomb ended the war and saved more lives than it took. He asked, in his will, for no funeral and no grave marker. He did not want a site where protesters could gather. Emperor Hirohito had never spoken on radio before. In Japanese culture, the emperor's voice was not something ordinary citizens were meant to hear. He existed on a plane above the everyday. On August 15, 1945, for the first time in history, he spoke directly to the Japanese people in a recorded address broadcast across the nation. Most Japanese civilians had never heard his voice. Some did not initially recognize it. His formal court Japanese was so different from everyday speech that radio stations had to broadcast a transcription simultaneously so people could follow what he was saying. What he said was this: the war situation had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Japan would endure the unendurable. The enemy had deployed a cruel bomb of a new type, one of extraordinary destructive power. He did not use the word surrender, but everyone understood. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, which had killed an estimated 70 to 85 million people over 6 years, was over. The formal surrender was signed on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The atomic age had begun. Was it necessary? The argument for the bombings has been made consistently by American military and political figures for 80 years. The planned invasion of Japan would have resulted in catastrophic casualties on both sides. Some estimates placed American deaths alone at over 1 million. Japanese military and civilian casualties could have reached several million more. Seen through this lens, the atomic bombs, as horrific as they were, may have saved more lives than they took. The argument against is equally serious. Japan was already attempting to negotiate surrender. The naval blockade had cut off food and fuel to the point that the country was facing mass starvation regardless of military action. The Soviet Union's entry into the Pacific War on August 8, 2 days after Hiroshima, may have been as significant a factor in Japan's surrender as the bombs themselves, and the selection of civilian cities as targets raises moral questions that military necessity alone cannot fully resolve. Some of the scientists who built the bomb reached their own conclusions. Leo Szilard, who had drafted Einstein's original letter to Roosevelt, spent the rest of his life campaigning against nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer, watching the first test explosion in New Mexico, recalled the line from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He later said that after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, physicists had known sin. He meant it literally. We are not going to tell you what to think. The dead of Hiroshima and Nagasaki deserve more than a verdict delivered 80 years later by people who were not there. But they also deserve to be remembered as people, not as a number, not as a strategic calculation, not as proof in an argument. They were 70 70,000 people alive at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning, eating breakfast, walking to school, saying goodbye to someone at a door. 43 seconds later, they were shadows on stone. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the skeletal dome of the former Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, preserved exactly as it stood after the blast, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Every year on August 6th at 8:15 in the morning, bells ring across Hiroshima and the city observes a minute of silence. The Hibakusha spent decades being ignored and discriminated against. In 2024, an organization of Hibakusha called Nihon Hidankyo was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their decades of advocacy for nuclear disarmament. Many of the original survivors were in their 80s and 90s by then. Some had been waiting their entire adult lives for the world to listen. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons. The combined yield of the world's current nuclear arsenal is estimated at several thousand times the total explosive power used in all of World War II. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only nuclear weapons ever used in war, were, by modern standards, small. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who survived both bombs and lived to 93, was asked near the end of his life what he wanted people to understand. The only people who should be allowed to launch nuclear weapons are the people who have experienced them, and those people would never launch them. The shadows burned into the stone steps of Hiroshima are still there, fading slowly with time and weather, but still there. They are the only monument those people got. Wars, government secrets, survival stories, historical events that changed the world, and the hidden truths behind them that most people never learned. This is what the Redacted is. The stories history remembers and the details history tried to forget. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, because there are many more waiting, and none of them have simple answers.